I thought today what I'd try and do is give you a bit of my perspective and my company's perspective on where we see aged care in Australia moving in the next, say, 5 to 10 years, particularly what the government reforms are going to focus on, and a little bit about potentially how to navigate the system. A caveat on that, navigating the aged care system is incredibly difficult. And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges that the industry has at the moment. So I'll get into it. Oh, here we go. There we go. So if we start here, this is sort of where we see the continuum of care changing. So we're seeing more, if I start on the left there, we're seeing the rise of restorative care, and that's sort of a new term in aged care. I'm particularly from a residential aged care background now, but the concept with restorative care is essentially that we start to focus more on the idea of providing services and therapy to people to actually create goals and improve them on where they are today. So the Commonwealth is starting to throw quite a lot of support and certainly a lot of dollars around the concept of restorative care. From their perspective, you can see that they see it as a way of delaying people entering the aged care system in effect. So particularly delaying entry into residential aged care and possibly offsetting some hospital admissions and that sort of thing as well. So over this year, you'll start to see announced restorative care tenders that the government has been advertising over the last 12 months. And the restorative care program will be an adjunct program that will be approved by ACATs. So most of you are probably familiar with aged care assessment teams. And aged care assessment teams will then be able to approve people who are living in their own homes for a 12-week program for intensive therapy in essence. So that therapy can occur in their own home or it can actually occur in a residential aged care facility. And the point of that program, it'll be a goal-orientated program. So people will have that 12 weeks of physiotherapy, occupational therapy, might be input from psychologists. And depending on where they're at, it may be in their own home, as I said, or actually in a residential aged care facility. So again, that is not looking at people entering residential aged care permanently at that point. It's purely as a way of starting to capitalise on the infrastructure that aged care facilities have. So more and more aged care facilities have things like wellness centres and gyms, and they employ physiotherapists and occupational therapists and that sort of thing. So there is this infrastructure that's probably underutilised at the moment, and that's kind of what the government's trying to tap into in that regard. And then increasingly now we're seeing home care packages utilised more and more. The average age, as I said there, is about 82. And the government's opened up a lot more opportunity for home care package providers, particularly in the last few months by removing some of the regulation around home care. So I'll talk a little bit more later in the presentation about how that's actually working. But again, as a residential aged care provider, what I'm really seeing is that the extra funding committed into home care has meant that when people do arrive into residential aged care, they're arriving far later in life, and they're arriving with higher care needs than they previously had. So that's really changing the environment of residential aged care as well. So gone are the days of operating hostels where residents were still driving cars and participating heavily in the community. Now residential aged care, and increasingly in the future, will be very, very high care, reduced length of stay, and the point being that you'll stay at home as long as you possibly can, and residential aged care will be that kind of last resort when you physically can't stay at home anymore. And one of the big things residential aged care will deal with more and more in the future is of course dementia too. Dementia is one of those very difficult conditions to actually stay safely at home, because as you do progress to a point, you need 24/7 care. And that's certainly the direction you'll start to see in the industry. Somewhere in the middle of all that too, I think we're going to start to see more of a rise in retirement. And when I say retirement, I mean retirement villages, which sort of went out of fashion somewhere around the 90s, but increasingly now retirement villages are becoming more and more attractive. And that's because they're being co-located with residential aged care facilities and co-located with community services and that sort of thing as well. So we as an aged care provider are certainly looking to build aged care campuses that will contain a full spectrum of different care. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. As I was saying, we're looking now more and more at the idea of we are living longer, but how do we start to live better as well? So there's lots of research too around the burden of disease. So while we're living longer with disabilities as well. And so the focus now, and will be increasingly, is getting away from that sick model and trying to look more at different ways to enable people to become more independent and improve upon where they're at any given point in time. Particularly a lot of emphasis around social inclusion and social activities. And then increasingly you'd be aware of lots of different gym programs available to older people. And the emphasis is in improvement in balance, improvement in leg strength, which ultimately leads to other functional improvements as well. And again, helps people stay independent for longer and stay at home for longer too. So again, that's all an investment in people's future as well. Probably the main guiding document from the government's perspective on what will happen in the next few years is this aged care roadmap. So the aged care roadmap, I think I'm right in saying at the moment, is not formally endorsed by the government, but it's clear within the industry that some of the principles in the aged care roadmap are the direction that the industry and the government see aged care moving in. Really, it's a really easy document to read, so if you get a chance, you can have quite a quick look at it in just a single page. But the principle with the aged care roadmap is it's really setting out the idea that in the next 10 years, consumer choice will really dictate what happens in the aged care industry. So at the moment, funding... At the moment in community, they've actually just gone through a major change in that the supply of home care packages isn't regulated anymore. And so in removing that regulation, you're going to see, and we are already seeing, more and more home care providers entering that market. So traditional residential aged care providers like Opal and Bupa, they're now actually pushing really hard into community care as well, and they see lots of opportunities there. And because you don't have to apply to the government now to run packages, you just need to be an approved provider, there's possibilities that will start to drive the costs down of those packages too. There'll be a lot more competition in that space. So that's definitely by design and is I guess consistent with this market-driven approach that the government is looking at. You will see that eventually in residential aged care as well. We're certainly preparing for that. So again, what that actually means in practice, at the moment, if you operate an aged care facility and you have, say, 100 beds, that means the government has given you 100 licences to operate that facility. So you can't turn around and operate it as a 101 bed facility because the government won't fund that extra one bed. By deregulating, they're saying, in essence, the licences don't matter anymore. If the person has been approved by ACAT and you're a licensed provider, then you can provide care to as many people as you want to. So that's certainly the direction it's going, but there's also some risk around that too if you're in regional areas, and that's why I think the government needs to be quite cautious in how they proceed in that space. In operating a residential aged care facility, it's well known that the facilities in metro areas are certainly more profitable, and the facilities in regional areas do really struggle. But because there's so much heavy government regulation, the government will only offer licences in regional areas if a regional area is short on aged care facilities. If you remove that regulation, then providers, in theory, certainly some of the big for-profit providers, will only provide residential aged care in areas where it's profitable, and that's in metro areas. So that would be a big disadvantage to regional areas. And certainly my organisation has a big presence in regional New South Wales, and so it's an issue that we're certainly taking really seriously and advocating for. I guess the other part of reduced regulation and market forces being more at play here is the government is very clear that the user will pay more, they'll pay a higher percentage. So while there'll be increased competition in the market, which will drive down prices in one regard, the government does not want to spend as much money in the future on aged care. They want the recipients of aged care to actually contribute a higher percentage to their package. So while what it costs to provide aged care might be a little bit less, the percentage that the government pays versus a resident will be changing as the government seeks to reduce their input and increase what users pay, in essence. The other point there being that around consumer choice, what you typically see provided now in an aged care facility is sort of non-negotiable, but the idea with these reforms is that a resident can start to pick and choose what's important to them. So if there's services that are of no relevance to them, then they don't have to pay for those services. They will just pay for the services that they think are important to them. Clearly, technology is going to be one of the big drivers in the next few years. At the moment, I know that most local health districts use their own software programs. Certainly, most aged care providers use software programs now, and there's 2 or 3 main ones. There is obviously the e-health records, and GPs, a lot of GPs now are using software programs as well. So what we really anticipate and hope to see in the near future is that you're going to have more seamless communication between different parts of the health system and the aged care system, so that when a resident attends if an aged care resident attends their GP, the GP will already have access to what's been happening with their health before they arrive and at any point in time. And whatever the GP's consult involves, that information can flow directly back to the aged care provider. And then the same scenario too with the health services as well. So that's an area that will start to hopefully reduce some of the duplication, save people's time, and some of the research out there is saying that that the savings may be quite significant, as you can see there. So it's I guess this overall concept of a more fully integrated healthcare system. So we've got a kind of a case study here. So this is Norma, one of our community clients. And so since consumer-directed care was implemented on home care packages, clients like Norma now have more flexibility and choice to choose what they want as part of their community packages. So they get a sum of money from the government, they take that to their aged care provider, and they say to their aged care provider, I don't want all of the traditional things that you might offer me. Yes, the aged care provider's got to meet their basic care needs, but if people like Norma want to save more money to put towards an experience, or a holiday, or I think some of the scenarios we talk through in a second are extra help with staying competent to drive a car. There's a lot more flexibility now, and that client has a lot more opportunity to dictate how they'll spend their funding from the government. So again, scenario here, I just wanted to put that up because as a residential aged care provider, about 60% of the referrals we receive come from acute hospitals. So what that means in effect is that something has happened in the person's life quite suddenly, often a fall or a stroke. They've ended up in an acute hospital and they're now faced with a choice that they will not be able to return home. And so quite quickly, the option of residential aged care comes into the picture. And a lot of people are still very unprepared for that, as you would be. But I guess what we're trying to encourage people more and more as they age is to start to have a think about those things, so that when you're in that crisis situation, you've got at least an idea of how you might handle it, and you're speaking to your family, and you've sort of made some decisions in advance. But 60% of referrals is pretty well indicative of the industry too. So as much as we all sort of sit back and think that entry into an aged care facility is a planned process and it occurs at a point when someone's no longer able to stay at home, often in actual fact it's through a crisis that residents end up in an aged care facility. One of the things, we're already seeing GPs who have specialty areas, and that's nothing new, but increasingly aged care specialisation is something that we're seeing more GPs interested in doing. One of the things that we do talk to some of our clients about is the idea of making sure that that you're talking to a GP that understands some of the aged care system and understands your aged care needs. And that's not to say you abandon the GP that you've had for 30 years or something like that, but quite often some GPs will be less confident around navigating the aged care system than others. And so we really are advocating for our clients and certainly our home care package clients to make sure that the GP who's treating them and advising them has an understanding of how the aged care system works, and can help point them in the right direction, because that's often the starting place to starting to access some of these services. Just a little more on technology. So these are this is really just scratching the surface. Some of the stuff that people can now access in their own homes and will be increasingly in the future. We are starting trials now with wearable devices, and that's even in residential aged care. So we have residents with dementia, and increasingly we're seeing younger residents with dementia. And they're coming to us at times in their 50s and 60s. And we had an incident about a year ago where we had a former rugby league player, and he had younger onset dementia, and he was really, really fit. but he had severe dementia and exit seeking and wandering. And while we had a secure facility in Sydney, he had no trouble at all jumping over a 6-foot wall. And so how do you actually start to keep those residents safe? And certainly his family expects that we will figure out a way of doing that. So we came across what's been a fantastic solution, and it's the first one under technology there. They're actually GPS insoles that go in your shoes, and they have literally been a lifesaver for him. The night he left the facility initially, he was gone all night in the middle of winter. So we knew we had to do something pretty drastic. We found him, he was okay. And so since then, we've started using these GPS insoles. And what can actually happen is we can set up what they call a geo fence around our aged care facility. And it's reasonably easy to make sure that he's wearing the insoles every day, because the carers will dress him and make sure he puts the shoes on. And so what can happen there is that if he actually leaves the facility manager and a few other contacts get an immediate text message once he's more than 10 metres away from the facility. And then we can actually go on and open a mobile app, and we can track him anywhere in the world within 10 metres. So we can recover that resident really quickly and safely if they go missing. And there's been a few instances too where the staff have said, we've lost him, we don't know where he is. Go and find the app, he's gotten out. And we've been able to quickly pull up that he's actually still in the facility, but he's in another resident's room, and we were able to find him and reassure everyone in that way. So really simple technology like that, I think, is making a real difference to people's lives. And there's obviously no reason that can't be employed in the community and that sort of thing as well. So we've been really impressed, and we're starting some research around those particular insoles. There's only one company at the moment in Australia who has the rights to them. But there's also things around the GPS tracking space. We're also putting more and more clients, giving them GPS watches. And the GPS watches, again, are for people who are getting less confident getting out in the community. So if they have a fall, they can press a button and it triggers an automatic alert to a 24-hour back to base station. And it also sends text messages to their families. We can then find them wherever they are and assist them. And then the watches, again, it doesn't sound that new given the last few years, but the watch is also a telephone too. So it's got program numbers, so we can call them and talk to them, particularly if they've had a fall somewhere and they need help. So there's some amazing stuff that GPS tracking is allowing us to do now. We're looking more and more at other wearable technology too. So we've got residents now wearing Fitbits and that sort of thing, and we're starting basically a bit of healthy competition in our facilities to reach steps goals and that sort of thing. So it's a very different way of looking at residential aged care. So we're encouraging people to be as active as they really can be. So here again, I'm sure most of you are aware and starting to see the technology available in people's homes. So increasingly within homes there are falls alert sensors being used. So for example, as a family member, you can receive a text message if it's 11 a.m. and the sensor in the bedroom when someone leaves the bedroom hasn't been activated. A son or a daughter can receive a text message. and they can be set up all around the house. And again, we actually use those sensors too in residential aged care, and they're really cheap and easy, and reasonably unobtrusive. Again, with coming back to Norma, this was just an example of some of the choice that consumers have now. So whereas in the past, home care package might have included things like assistance with showers, meals, keeping the house tidy, there are lots and lots of possibilities that money can be spent on now, and it's really dictated by the person who owns the money, which is the client. As a company, we are building lots and lots of aged care facilities across Australia, and so some of the broad concepts that we're looking at now is the idea of having retirement villages and residential aged care and community spaces all on the one campus. There's lots of benefits to that, obviously from an economies of scale type perspective. So we can build hydrotherapy pools that a residential aged care facility would never usually have. And we can build retail areas and bring a kind of bit of a lifestyle to that campus as well. And there's some examples of other things that we're starting to find we can do. It also helps to if a person needs to make that transition into residential aged care, it's far less confronting if you're still sort of on the same campus, and the friends that you've made on that campus can still come and see you, and you can go and see them without a lot of difficulty. So just talking about some of the designs in our facilities, you can see here, as we age, our visual spectrum changes. So on the left is what a normal person would see, a younger person, and on the right you can start to see how your vision changes as you age. So that has implications with how we design facilities in terms of, especially I guess when it comes to falls prevention as much as anything. But dementia is the other area where you can see you start to lose some of the colour spectrum in your vision. So we look at ways we can make life easier for people with dementia. So in our dementia units, this is the sort of stuff that is increasingly being used. So again, the image on the left there, you can see the plate with the red ring around it. The concept there is that you're starting to focus a person's attention on the plate in front of them. And we're finding too that we're trying to be far more flexible with the type of food we serve too. So again, if you suffer severe dementia, using knives and forks becomes increasingly difficult, and so we're trying to look at the type of food that we serve in those units and make sure that it actually can be eaten with fingers and that sort of thing, if that's an issue for people. You'll see too there the toilet bowl with the bright colours. When we design our facilities, that's certainly something we do in our dementia units to draw attention to where the toilets are. But you'd be surprised how much time I've spent with our property team trying to plan where in a bathroom the toilet should sit. It's something that we obviously think is important, but it all comes down to lines of sight. So again, we want to position things like toilets in bathrooms to make it as obvious to someone with dementia where the toilet is, so that it's not tucked around in the corner of the bathroom. It's the very first thing you can see, and that goes a long way to helping the person maintain continence, independence. The other thing we're doing now is making sure that that we have a 24-hour little pin light that sits above all our toilets. So again, even in the night time, there's this really subtle little light that will focus on where the toilet is. So again, helping the person maintain their independence with their continence for as long as we possibly can. We're partnering with health services and with Charles Sturt. So we've just, in August, our clinical chair will join Catholic Healthcare. So that's a partnership with Charles Sturt to start to conduct research in residential aged care. There's not a lot of great research about residential aged care. So it's been an initiative that we're really, really pleased to be able to start to offer a lot more in that space. So keep a lookout for the research that we start to publish with Charles Sturt. And increasingly, we're partnering with health districts in New South Wales, in particular, where we are, around hospital avoidance initiatives. And from both ends, it's very much a win-win, because we want to keep our residents out of hospital, and if we can manage whatever their acute issue is in our facility, then we'd far prefer that, and our residents would far generally prefer that as well. And obviously it's a win for the hospitals as well. So there's some good evidence coming out of some of the districts in Sydney that where they provide a geriatrician to support the local aged care facilities, they're reducing the admissions from residential aged care facilities by some staggering numbers. So it's seen as a really good investment. Some of the real challenges that we've had are around our workforce. So increasingly we're looking towards basically starting to try and train our own staff. So making it as attractive as we can for registered nurses to join aged care facilities. And we're running our own first-year graduate programs. In regional areas, it is really tough to find registered nurses who are interested in working in residential aged care, and we have facilities out there that need 24-hour registered nurse coverage. And so we've had a lot of success in the last 18 months with our first-year graduate program out in Dubbo and Forbes. So that's something that we're excited about expanding this year. So just, I guess, sort of really in summary, what we're seeing in the industry is more and more deregulation and uncapping supply. What you will start to see and be able to do is compare aged care providers and the quality outcomes that they get. So the government's had a bit of trouble sort of working out how exactly to do that, but you'll definitely start to see data on the number of wounds per resident, urinary tract infections, falls, a whole range of different clinical outcomes in residential aged care facilities, and you'll be able to compare facility to facility. One of the real challenges in the industry for a prospective resident is you really can only tell how good an aged care facility is by how nice the building looks often, and that really doesn't tell you what you need to know. So that's why I think the government's idea to start to publish some of the actual clinical outcomes of aged care facilities is a really good step forwards. And you will, of course, see the TripAdvisor type reviews, and we're seeing them already. There are probably 5 or 6 websites who are running commentary and reviews on aged care facilities, but probably no one's got it quite right yet, and at some point I'm sure we'll see one probably rise above the others. So I think I'm getting pretty close, yeah. So that's a bit of a summary of the journey that we see typical residents and aged care recipients following now. You'll see on the third column there, My Aged Care. and it is a huge challenge for anyone wanting a package or a placement in an aged care facility. Navigating that website is a real challenge, and I think for prospective residents who don't have support, that's an area that's a real stumbling block. So again, we are looking to try and help residents as much as we can from the beginning of their journey, and one of the things we really pride ourselves on is managing people through a whole transition over their life and helping them navigate the aged care system. So there's some information that we're distributing to GPs, and I think they're in your packs. Otherwise, I think that is the end. So thank you everyone for having me, and if you have any questions, I'll hang around.
Beautiful. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you.